Welcome to Amy's Bookshelf Reviews podcast. I'm Amy Shannon, but you can call me Amy. Thank you for listening. Hello and welcome, and I hope all is well with you. I'm Amy, and today I'm talking about characters and creating them. And, just a few tips and information about how you create a character. When someone is telling a story and introduces the characters need to have some flair or some kind of depth. You want to make sure that they're like a person, a real human being. And the storyteller wants the characters to be more than one-dimensional idea, but be also somebody relatable, personable, even if the character is an alien, or there should be some kind of hint of human quality. That way a reader can actually relate to that. Characters are not just the people or animals or whatever brings the story to life, but the character can also be the setting. It's an important part to the plot and important to the story, and it has an impact on other characters. And when I think about what that would mean, in my series or saga, the MOD Life Epic Saga, most of the setting is set in a fictional town in Arizona, and where they are located, there's desert around the towns. So that is something, like, if you have never been there, you would want to do your research on the type of weather and settings and things that could affect it. Arizona doesn't very much get snow. They might get some cold weather. The air is dry, sandy, of course, and I've had natural disasters happen, like earthquakes, because I've did research on earthquakes. Also, you can get flooding and things like that, which can affect your story. So that is something that it has an impact on characters. Say, how would your characters react if their town had earthquakes or a sinkhole or a rainstorm that seemed to never end, or a heat wave? If they're in a different setting, maybe snowstorms or blizzards. And getting to know the characters is important for the storyteller, especially when writing the story. The story should be shown and not really told, even if being narrated. Ever listen to a narrator of a movie or a television show? The narrator paints a picture with words, even though the audience can see. The difference in the book is that the words have to be transformed into more than just words on a page. Creating a character is an art form. Characters need to be real, and even if they're dystopian or in an improbable genre, they should invoke some kind of emotion. They don't have to be likable, and they can be irredeemable, but that would invoke some kind of emotion as well, unless you have a sociopath or a psychopath that is one of your characters, and you need to know how they would react as well, and how they would act by themselves or in front of other characters. Some of my favorite characters that I create are really jerks, or they're evil. They're just the villain, and they have these weird quirks that make them that way, but also there's maybe a sense of humanity. Some of the characters are fun when they have a quirk or something that is all about them. The character should also be able to be recognized by their tone, dialogue, appearance, and even if their name isn't explicitly stated. Characters with accents or some unique dialect shouldn't have something that is illegible for someone to read. If a character speaks incoherently, say that. Don't try to spell out the mutters or mumbles unless there is one or two that is specific to the character. And also, when creating a character, sometimes the author uses a real-life muse to base the character on. And that's well and good, but a writer shouldn't make it too much like the real person. And what seems to work better is when a writer uses people uses pieces of a few different persons to create one. There is another way to get started on your character and try to make them human is an exercise called character profiles. They're useful when creating a character, especially main characters, but sometimes they work for minor characters as well. There are times, and it happens to me, when a minor character becomes a major character and remains that way. In my first book, Unwritten Life, Jim O'Rourke was just supposed to be a techie with a crush on his boss, and then he started to date her. They eventually got married, had kids, divorced, died, remarried a few times, came back to life, all within the large MOD life saga. And it would have been a totally different story if he had just stayed a background character. And also, character interviews. They're fun and interesting to do, character interviews. Once you have your character created, and even if you completed your story, doing an interview can give a great insight into something the author doesn't even realize. Put yourself in the character's shoes, and it doesn't just have to be the main character of the story. See if it leads you where you want to go. In upcoming episodes, I will be doing character interviews, some with my own characters, and if you're an author who wants me to interview one of your characters, you can go to my podcast page and fill out the request form and get all the information on how you would get your character interviewed. Basically, I would send you a form, an interview form for your character, and you would answer it as your character. And then I would interview the character online using a computer AI voice that will either be male or female depending on how you wish your character to speak. So that is something that I've just started, and I will be doing mine off and on and fitting in other people's as well. I am scheduling podcasts into 2025. So there is time, and as long as I have one listener, I hope I have more, I will continue to do the podcast. And as long as I can share my work and author's work with the audience, and maybe someone will pick up one of our books and start reading it. And, my hope for myself is that I will become someone's favorite author. Even if it's just for a little while. It's nice to know that. I have a lot of authors that I read for, and I have a lot of authors that I enjoy reading their work, and I can't say which ones are my favorite, but I can say the ones that keep coming back to me, I really, I invest in those authors, and sometimes I refer to the legacy authors, the ones that keep coming back to me, as my authors when I speak to them, and it's a term of endearment, because I am so grateful for the love and support I get from these authors, and I try to do my best to support them in return. And in continuing the conversation about characters, recently, not that long ago, I wrote 2019, I released my book. It was workbook, Depths of Characters, and it is still available on sale. It has exercises for writers. It talks about the various creating characters, and how to do a profile, genre, characters based on genre, characters that have various point of views within the story, and also samples of author interview questions for them to, interview their characters. Sometimes if you do it after you've written a couple drafts of your book, you might find, as you're thinking as that character, which you've created and it's inside, and that person is inside you, that you may want to add more about that character to the actual story and not just keep their secrets to yourself. So, the most unforgettable characters. Any writer who wants to tell a story needs to bring in characters. The characters, no matter what species or beings, need to be more than one-dimensional. The characters make up the story and breathe life into it. Sometimes there can be too many characters, and sometimes there is not enough, and sometimes it's just the right amount that tells the story. More like shows the story, and that's very important. You want to be able to show your story, your vision of the story. And when we read, we think in our head. If you are a visual person like I am, when I'm reading it, I'm picturing what the characters look like to me and how they talk and things like that. I do the same when I am writing a character, creating one. One way a writer can prepare is to create character profiles. They can be in-depth details with every aspect of the character's life, or a quick biography that may grow within the story. Profiles can help decide occupation, background, backstory of the character, and wherever they may have originated from. Also, what's important, and I find that the naming process. I know a lot of writers, they have their own ways and personal ways of creating names. An important part of the character's growth is the naming process. Writers create placeholder names sometimes, and I've seen books where they forgot to write, they would write insert name here for this character because they couldn't think about it. And that's something you need to make sure that you don't use placeholders. Personally, I sit back and I ponder the name if it doesn't come right away. I don't use placeholders, but I have changed names in the context of the story as it didn't seem to fit my book. In my book, Contrary Measures, my main character, Raina, Rayna, was originally named Emily, but in chapter 1, I realized it didn't fit the toughness of the story. Tip, though, when changing the name while writing the story, even during editing, maybe make sure you change every instance of the name. Characters' names can play a big part of the story. In my book, Smashed, my character, Savvy McAvoy, her real name is Sunshine Rainbow Savvy McAvoy, and she was raised as a hippie, so her and her brother's unique names play a big part in the story. Background, ethnicity, race can also lend to the story. Character surnames are about as important as the first name. If the character is Italian, it's important for the surname to be Italian unless the character was adopted or the parentage is different. Language and voice. Character backgrounds and upbringing should be reflected into how they speak, and if they speak different languages, how languages are translated within stories up to the author. In some cases, I wrote out the Italian or Spanish words and then either added parentheses with the translation, or I had other characters translate. Like, say, one of my characters would say grazie, and another character say, oh, well, you're welcome, so we know that that person said thank you. I've also had characters that use ASL, American Sign Language, and I made sure instead of the word said was written, the word signed was indicated. One thing about vocalization in languages is that writers should be clear to indicate what the character is saying, and not always being hung up on how the words sound coming out of their mouth. Indication of an accent without having to write the accent can be better and clearer. And other times, writing the word bout, with apostrophe, B-O-U-T, instead of about, or cause, a parenthesis, C-A-U-S-E, instead of because they may be worth the emphasis. Minor characters are not just always background characters, such as a reporter asking a question or receptionist that is always sitting behind the desk at the hospital. I like to name real background characters, and if they appear in the story more than once. I've also had characters that started out in the story to be minor and then really became part of the story in a whole new way. It wasn't how I intended it, but sometimes characters grow along with the story as it's written. Any writer will understand that no matter how much is or how little is planned in the writing process, the story can take a whole new level, especially with characters. And I've mentioned this before, that the character Jim in Unwritten Life, he was just going to be a technician, and he ended up falling in love with his boss, and that created the family that continued on and grew within the town of Sour Springs. Other characters are not just people or beings, and I say beings because many characters have been aliens, animals, monsters, humans, etc. The other characters can be the ones that are non-beings. The non-beings can be the environment, scenery, or the building, or even spaceship that the story takes place. These characters are what the story revolves around and can dictate how others react and act within the story. These other characters bring a new level of the story. Environment characters can bring a myriad of weather or natural disasters. My saga of books is set in the fictional town of Sour Springs, Arizona, is out near the desert. Several stories revolved around the weather or natural disasters such as an earthquake and flood, and even the dry heat. These affect the stories and the characters' reactions. Flaws. No character should be perfect unless they're an angel, and even then, they should have flaws. Characters who have flaws are the greatest and the characters should grow. Some characters may drink too much, some are self-absorbed, some want to rule the world, and some just want to live their life and fall in love. Not everyone should be rich and have an endless amount of money, and some should be hard-working people, sometimes down on their luck. I've written about millionaires, law enforcement officers, lawyers, private investigators, homeless veterans, just to name a few types, and none of them are like the other. They have quirks and flaws and qualities that make them human or human-like. Villains. For me personally, villains are the most fun to write for, and I say write for because I'm telling their story. Villains are mean or ruthless, sometimes violent or crazy, and sometimes just misunderstood. Villains can be redeemed or partially redeemed, and villains can get away with crime and be caught again and again. Villains should be written as villains, the kind people love to hate, or just that people plain hate them. If they hate your villain, it's okay. That's what they're there for. Good can turn to evil, but there also needs to be some type of indication, even if it's minor. An evil can turn to almost good. It's how the character is written and how they act. I like those villains that aren't quite villains, but are rude jerks and just love to antagonize people. Characters should never be plain or simple, but sometimes that's what's required. Characters can add levity or humor to dark situations, giving a sense of lightness in the story, even for a moment or at a time when it may feel appropriate but be needed. Think of a cop procedural show when 3 cops are standing over a dead body at the crime scene and one quips a one-liner about the cause of death. It seems inappropriate, but it may be how they deal with the situation they are in. Characters can make or break a story. They should be thought out and allowed to grow. Yes, the characters come from the writer's mind, but when it's on paper, they should be able to take a breath and journey through the plot. They are not just part of the story, they are the story. So that's kind of like my take on creating characters and how to develop your characters. You want them to feel real no matter what the character is. You know, if you watch sci-fi movies, you have various beings, or if you have fantasy, the same thing. You have monsters and creatures and alien races, and aliens are not just the big-headed green monsters from Mars that are suspected to be in that secret base in Area 51. And also, one thing you can find, which I find is really interesting, is people observation. You know, you kind of go somewhere and you people watch and you kind of figure out, you know, what they might be saying or how they inspire you. I was working in a corporate job, and there were 4 of us in one room at one huge table, and we all had our corner of the table. And one of my coworkers was this tall, beautiful woman, and she was so kind. And one time, a developer, we were software testing at the time, one time a developer had come in, and he had to talk to her, but he was shy, and he couldn't look her up at her in the eye and talk to her face to face. As I noticed how he was holding a water bottle, and he was very nervous that he was twisting it and squeezing it, and I swear that if he twisted it any harder, the water was just going to burst open from the top. And he stuttered a lot to get the information out, but you could tell that he was enamored by her beauty and her kindness. It's like as if he had never encountered a beautiful woman before that he had to directly talk to. So I actually made note of that, and I wrote a similar scene about that. I was inspired by that and wrote it into a book where a man who was not familiar with dating or, and he met the love of his life, and when he met her, he was just so enamored. And so it's those kind of things. And I recommend to don't name your characters after your family or your friends. If you do, change the name in a way that you know it's them, and make it so if they read it, they're not saying, wait a minute, that's me. And sometimes you just use a name and it has nothing to do with the character, and they're like, is that what you think of me? And so you don't want to go down that road. But you can base your characters on people. What I like to do is take a variety of personality traits from various people and put them into one person or one character. I have sometimes